Will Nikola Jokic win a third straight MVP this year?
I believe he will. It's just my time following the NBA, I've noticed that voters in particular also have egos, which I get it. Like Carson, if I called you and I was like, "Hey, buddy, guess what? Congratulations, you get to vote on NBA awards for the rest of for the rest of your career," you'd be like, "Hell yeah, dude, I'm one of those guys," And
Yeah.
I think they have a little bit of ego, and I think that they write about it throughout the season, and so they make arguments throughout the season for why they feel a certain way, and so it's really hard for them to come off of that. And that Tim Bontemps article, that MVP straw poll, is very much it's kind of weirdly prescient, like it's right almost every time.
Mhm.
So given the advantage that Jokic had in that poll, and where I've seen on Twitter the way a lot of these voters are arguing this point, I think it's a runaway train. I don't think he's missing it. Now, to be clear, if he wins his third straight and he's deserving, I have no problem with that. I don't think that just because a guy may or may not have not deserved a previous MVP doesn't mean he shouldn't get one that he absolutely deserves if he deserves it within the season. But I have a big question for you, Carson, and I'm hoping you can help me reconcile this, because the issue that I have with it is, if you ask me who is the MVP if the season ended right now, I think it's a toss up
Mhm.
between Giannis and Jokic, and I think Joel Embiid is right there behind them. And so it bothers me that the narrative has it as a runaway freight train kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of read this to you, and Carson, you can tell me if I'm being crazy. So Nikola Jokic is averaging 25, 12, and 10. He's obviously got a 70% true shooting percentage, which is absurd, although he's not relying on almost any self creation. Like, he's not doing a ton of isolating or posting up. He's doing a lot of work kind of within the flow of the offense relative to some of the other guys that he's
Mhm.
competing with. That's going to lead to inflated true shooting percentages, in my opinion. The Nuggets are 41 and 18. I do think he is demonstrated himself as the best offensive player in the league. I think that's a hill that you've been on for a couple years now, and I think I'm on that hill now too. But with Giannis, I'm getting 32, 12, and 5, 60% true shooting, albeit on a totally different type of shot diet. They're a half game better in the standings, 41 and 17. I would argue he's done more with less. We just talked about in the last segment about the influx of offensive talent for the Bucks and the way that's completely transformed their offense. There's been a lot of this season with like Giannis out there with Brooke Lopez and just a bunch of guys. You know what I mean? Drew Holiday's been in and out of the lineup. Chris Middleton's barely been in the lineup. Joe Ingles just started playing in the last dozen or so games. So like, it's one of those things where I do think he's done a little bit more than less with less. I think he's a top 5 offensive player in the league, and I think he's the very best defensive player in the league. We mentioned that clutch stat earlier, the 22 and 6 in clutch games with what he can do defensively. So I'm not saying it is Giannis, but why is it that Jokic fans, and you're a Jokic fan and you're a Jokic supporter, why is it that Jokic fans feel like this is kind of a done deal?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I don't feel that way at all. And if anybody picked Giannis, I completely understand it. I think these are the two guys who have consistently carried their rosters the most. Yes, they have good rosters, but are clearly like in a completely different tier in terms of superstar ability from anybody else on their team. Giannis has done so much defensively, although the Bucks are really talented there as well, but they've been unbelievable on that end. And I mean, his raw production and what he has done to raise their floor offensively and make them an elite team without Chris Middleton for so much of this year is remarkably impressive. I guess I'll just make the case for why I do still think it's Jokic. It is the most efficient scoring season at this volume that we've ever seen by nearly 3 points true shooting. And I understand what you're saying about the shot diet. That being said, his versatility is unprecedented for a big man, right? Like, he is actually the highest volume post player in the league, and he scores at 91st percentile efficiency there. He's a 90th percentile roll man. Jason, he's a 68th percentile pick and roll ball handler. He's 7 foot, 285 pounds. Like, the inverted pick and roll are legitimately important for the Nuggets, and he crushes it. He is a 55% shooter from mid range, 70% on floaters. So, like, to me, the shot making, the scoring is remarkable. And that's obviously not the primary selling point, which I think is the playmaking and the overall ability to lift a team offense. Like, His on-off splits this year plus 24.7, the best of this century of any player, point blank. Plus 13.7 on-court net rating. That's how many points per 100 possessions the Nuggets outscore their opponents by when he's on the floor. It's easily the best of any candidate. It's 5 points per 100 possessions better than Giannis. Meanwhile, Giannis's team, yes, is mediocre when he's off the floor, but they don't fall apart as Jokic's Nuggets do. And I understand if people are growing a bit tired of that argument because it's like, yeah, well, part of that is that the Nuggets don't have really a playable backup center or haven't for so much of this year. And I understand that, but nevertheless, he is so fundamental to not just elevating this offense, but to making it the best in the league. They're 38-13 when he plays. So to me, I think he's clearly the best offensive player. I think he's had the best offensive season, and I think he has had the largest impact on team success. I actually do, but I think the margin between him and Giannis is slim there. And if you want to make the two-way better all-around argument for Giannis, who has also had such unbelievable offensive production and propelled his team to being elite, I really have no problem with that. I do think it's a toss-up, and I could see Giannis actually taking the lead down the stretch. I mean, if the Bucks just run away with it now that they're at full strength, and I would have no problem with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because specifically with the shot diet stuff, I want to be clear. Like, I don't think you get bonus points for making it more difficult. I always joke about, like, I'll have guys when I'm playing, sometimes it'll be like, they'll be like, why are you calling for a ball screen or something like that? I'm like, do you think I get bonus points for scoring on you? Like, no, it's like, I'm trying to win this game. Okay. Like, I don't care how we go about doing it. Right. You know, it's like, what I appreciate about Jokic is I think the fact that he scores so much in the flow of the offense is part of what makes them such a dominant regular season team, because there is such a rhythm and flow to the way they play offensively. But I do, and you pointed out the post-up stuff, and I want to be clear. It's not like Jokic is never looking to create his own shot. Of course he does. Primarily, he's doing it out of the post. A lot of times against mismatches that are generated through the flow of his, inverted pick and rolls and the things that he does pushing the ball in transition. But I do think there's something to be said about, especially when you get into late game situations and in the postseason, that rhythm and flow offense tends to have a little bit of a ceiling to it. You saw that in that Philadelphia game. Like, at the end of that game, Philly got in front of all of those Denver actions, and nobody on Denver wanted to take and make a tough shot. And on the other end of the floor, Joel Embiid was just staring Jokic right in the eyeballs and hitting pull-up jumpers in his face. So, like, and that's just one game. And there's also a version of that game where Embiid doesn't get hot at the end, and then Denver wins, and then everyone's talking about how great Jokic is, right? So, but what I'm just saying though is, like, in terms of, like, oh, he's having one of the most efficient scoring seasons in the history of the NBA, I do think that there's an important footnote there, which is that the way that Jokic is doing it is different than a lot of the other high volume scoring seasons in NBA history. So I do think that factors into the efficiency. I do want to push back on one last thing though. I can't stand it when I hear the Jokic proponents point out the on-off stats. Not that I don't appreciate the on-off stats, but there's two huge factors there. You mentioned one of them. They don't have a good bench, at least not until before the trade deadline. I do think Reggie Jackson and Thomas Bryant will help a lot in that department. But the Nuggets also use kind of a line shift system. And that's a huge difference between the way most teams in the NBA do it. Most teams in the NBA like to stagger a little bit more, to give themselves a little bit more continuity with talent on the floor throughout the game. The Nuggets are very much we're running our starters, and then we're going to bring out our bench group, and then we're going to come back to our starters. And so that massive drop-off in talent is a big part of why they struggle so much when the starters, or when Jokic is off the floor. That's why you see, like, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's on-off numbers are through the roof, right? Like, there's a huge part of that is the way they stagger those lineups. So, for Milwaukee, for instance, they run a more traditional rotation with guys in and out of the lineup. There's a lot of Giannis at center as they go to their bench. So I do think that there's some context there. Yeah. I really put it this simple. Like, these are two of the top, 5 players in the world that are having otherworldly seasons. Jokic has a more offensive edge. Giannis has a more defensive edge. I think that I would probably end up favoring the guy, provided that no one misses too much time. Like, if Giannis goes and misses 7 games here with his wrist, then it's a done deal. Like, Jokic gets it. And that's a huge thing with Jokic in the last few years, is his availability. That dude is just always ready to play. I think even when he's missed games this year, it's been like COVID. You know what I mean? So like his availability is a huge factor there. But they're close enough at this point that if you know if it's still just a 5 to 6 game gap between the two of them in terms of playing availability, and the Bucks finished ahead of them in the standings, I'd probably lean towards Giannis.
And I'm fine with that. And I will say, I think that those are both important and fair contextual points that you made on the on-off numbers. I would then simplify it, and sure, you're still getting the value that he's playing with a lot of starters, but I think just that pure on-court number, right? I mean, outscoring opposing teams by 13.7 points per 100 when he's on the floor is remarkable, and it's the best of any of these candidates. So I think that this should be viewed as a very even two-man race. I think that Embiid, because of sort of games missed, doesn't have quite as strong of a case, although he's not too far behind in that conversation, but doesn't quite have the team success. Like, the margins are slim here. So if you want to make an Embiid case, I would hear it out. I just think it's pretty clearly the weakest of the three. But if I could just for a moment vent, Jason, from the perspective of a longtime Jokic fan, a guy who actually picked him to win MVP the season before he did it, I don't know that I want him to win this MVP, because the narratives that have started, just the disgusting level of outrage and disingenuous arguments that are born out of him just being announced as a straw poll frontrunner, it's absurd. Like, we're getting so many bad faith arguments. We're getting the, well, hold on, everybody ragged on Russ as a stat patter when he averaged a triple-double, by the way, for which he won an MVP that he actually didn't deserve, in my opinion, but he won the MVP. And now we're not doing the same for Jokic. It's like, these could not be more different cases, right? Jokic has led the best offense in basketball without another legitimate star. He is this remarkable blend of efficiency and offensive versatility and playmaking. There's a massive impact on winning, right? Russ's team offense was 16th. Russ was wildly inefficient. Russ was, by the way, having his rebounds padded. Like, Steven Adams was trying to get him the ball so that he could initiate the offense more quickly. Look at his contested rebound rate. And then I just think the playoff success argument, it's like, if you think anybody could have contended with the Nuggets roster the last 2 years, you're tripping. Facundo Campazzo and Austin Rivers were their starting guards in a playoff series. They haven't had Jamal Murray. And Jokic has been incredible. So I just think it's going to put him in just an absurd position of people being like, all right, well, you got 3 MVPs. You need to win a ring right now or you're a fraud. And it's like, well, this is actually his first title caliber roster. And guess what? There's other title caliber rosters out there. Like, I just think it's going to be unfair on that front. But
let me commend you, Carson, really quickly before we move on. You went through that entire debate without mentioning a single catch-all metric, which is all I've been seeing on the damn Twitter timeline over the course of the last couple of weeks, which drives me completely insane. You made a basketball case for it, and I sincerely appreciate that.
Well, Jason, you and I are aligned in our dislike of catch-all one-number metrics. I think the idea that we could encapsulate a basketball player's value with one number is absurd, and I think defensive metrics are overwhelmingly offensively bad. But that's a conversation for another day. And by the way, defensive metrics clearly overrate Jokic. There's no doubt about that. But I think he's the best offensive player in basketball. I think his impact on team success in this regular season has still been unrivaled. But Giannis is incredible. And we've known from the jump that this was going to be an MVP race for the ages. And I think it's lived up to the hype.